Yepsail, all my beautiful people. How are you doing today? I hope everyone is having a great Thursday. Welcome to the alternate point of view. My name is Tracy Lee, and welcome everyone who has been viewing this channel. Thank you so much, and welcome to anyone who is new to this channel. On this channel, we mostly talk about trials and true crime, but we also, on occasion, throw a little tragedy and disaster in there because it's, oddly enough, fascinating and amazing, and actually it is like watching a train wreck. And also because all of these disasters and tragedies are 100% preventable. So I talk about these because they are preventable and because someone needs to be held accountable, and 9 times out of 10, someone is usually never really held accountable. And if they are, it is bare minimum. So it is Asian Heritage Month, and so I am going to talk about a tragedy that happened in South Korea in 1995. And I'm going to talk about this because South Korea, after the war, was one of the fastest growing nations in the world, and it literally grew from dust and dirt after being invaded and taken over by so many different countries. I mean, you're talking about China, Japan, the US, Russia, like so many countries. South Korea finally got its own independence after 1954, and finally decided that they weren't going to take it anymore and they were going to become their own independent nation. And they decided that they were going to prioritize independence by being strong in education and being strong in economics and building the nation up. And they did that quick, fast, and in a hurry. So I don't know if you know much about how South Korea managed to do that. Well, how do you go from nothing to something and actually being the fastest growing economic nation in the world? Well, this is how it happened. Well, South Korea grew basically through what we call chaebols. Chaebols are basically like what the US would refer to as the top 1%, okay? And that is what South Korea did. They had their top 1%, which is their equivalent to what the Roosevelts, the Koch brothers, the Hiltons, the Trumps, the whatever you call it here in America. That's what South Korea did in South Korea. They had their chaebols, the top 5 families, the Samsung, LG, Sampoong, Dawei, all of those companies ran South Korea. They run South Korea now still to this day. And they would have the money to back anything that was built. And they also would have the money to put in positions of power whomever they chose in order to get South Korea built the way they wanted it to be. If you notice in South Korea, you don't see very many houses. There's a lot of tall, high-rise condos. That's for the most part what everyone lives in there, is apartments, condos, whatever you want to call them, because everything had to be built up because there's just not much room there. I'm not sure if you're aware, but South Korea is only the size of Indiana. And there's about 30 million people there, which is a lot for that size of a country. So if you look at how fast South Korea grew, South Korea has the fastest internet in the world, and it grew so quickly in such a short amount of time, literally from the 1950s to the 1980s and 90s. I mean, they had the Olympics there in 1988. So you have to look at how fast they had to grow in order to have the Olympics in 1988, literally 30 years after a war. So they had to build that fast. And it literally takes a country about 10 years to build everything they need to build for an Olympics to be prepared. So they not only have to build everything you need for the Olympic Games, but you have to build hotels, you have to have retail ready, you have to have everything ready for every country to be there in time for the Olympics. So, you know, when they make the decision to host an Olympics, then they have to start building very quickly. So that is what happened when Sampoong decided to build the first and most exquisite mall in Seoul. And they built this mall called the Sampoong Department Store, and they started building it in 1987, I believe, where they wanted to have the best, the most elite mall in all of South Korea. And they had a construction company. This mall was going to be 4 levels, and the 4th level was going to be an ice skating rink and roller rink during the spring and summers and what have you. And they had big dreams for this mall. There were going to be escalators on each end. It was going to be fantastic and beautiful and elegant. And when we think of department store in America, we think of JCPenney, Sears, Dillard's, Belk, that kind of thing. But in South Korea, department store is a mall. So this department store mall had many different stores in it, different brands. The department store was lavish. The doors were opened by greeters, and they were all dressed in like these beautiful outfits, and they greeted everyone that came in. And it was meant to be for the rich of the rich, the best of the best, to come in and shop. And the basic blueprints, the first round of blueprints, had this mall that had 4 floors, and it was going to have escalators on each end and in the center so that you could get to each floor flawlessly. And it was going to have these columns and pillars that were going to be able to hold up each floor. And you were going to be able to have these magnificent stores everywhere. And there were just going to be people shopping, and it was going to be magnificent. And again, the 4th floor was going to be a rink for kids to go to and all of that fun stuff, right? So they employed a construction company to do the construction on this building, this structure. Now, originally, this land was a landfill, basically, and they wanted to put apartments on this landfill. And Sampoong came in and they won the bid on the land. How do you think they won the bid on the land? Because it was supposed to be apartments, because across the street are apartments, okay? And it's not like fancy apartments. They're kind of low income housing that was across the street. And they were protesting. They didn't want to have this fancy mall across the street because they knew what was going to happen eventually was that their low-income apartments were going to be kind of pushed away, and they were going to end up having to move because this fancy company was coming in with this fancy mall. Well, Sampoong won the bid for this land, and they won the bid to build this mall. Now, they weren't supposed to have certain things. The original blueprints that they gave is what they were supposed to build, was this department store with these 4 floors. But along the way, they decided they wanted to do something else. They wanted to add things here and there. And the original construction company said, you know what, we can't do this. This isn't stable. You can't add these extra plans to this blueprint because it won't hold. It's not structurally sound. These floors are too heavy for these support columns. So they said, we can't do it. We can't build this floor. This floor can't be held up by this column. It won't make it. So Sampoong said, fine, if you won't do it, you're fired. We'll do it ourselves. We'll make our own construction company. So Sampoong decided to make their own construction company and build this magnificent mall. And then they decided they were going to cut corners. Go figure. So instead of the fancy, beautiful escalators that were going to be on each end of the mall, in the center, and they were going to have all these columns all over the mall that were going to support this building, right? All of these floors, 4 floors. They decided they were going to cut the columns in half. They were going to take the columns away because why? It obstructed the view and it didn't look as pretty. So they were like, oh, we can't have those columns there. It doesn't look as good. Take those away. So there were less columns, and they took away the escalators at the other end of the building, and they only put 2 escalators right up the center of the building. So that only gave one way up and one way down. to the other floors. Then that fourth floor that was supposed to be an ice skating rink in the winter and a skating rink during the other parts of the year, turned out they wanted to make that restaurants. And we all know how heavy restaurants can be, right? Because the restaurants, you got to have stoves, you got to have dishwashers, you got to have all the staff, you got to have all these things on top of the fourth floor, which adds more weight. So then they were like, oh my gosh, oh crap, it's going to be so hot. They're cooking. Heat is going to come up. So they had to put air conditioners. Where were they going to put those? Well, on the roof, of course. We have to put those on the roof. So they put the AC units on the roof of the building, which was also only being held up by these thin little columns. And let's not forget the rebarb that they put up. They were supposed to be 16 rebarb holding up these columns, in the columns, okay, to help the concrete columns hold up. But because they changed the plans, they're only holding with eight rebarbs. So that was an issue. But they put the air conditioners on the roof, on top of the fourth floor that had all the kitchen equipment, on top of the other 3 floors that had all the department stores on it. So the air conditioners were so loud next to the apartments and the people living in the community that they complained. They complained so loudly that finally they got Sampoong to move the air conditioners. Okay? But they didn't just move them. Instead of getting proper equipment to lift the air conditioners, instead of lifting the air conditioners off of the roof, instead of lifting them and moving them, they slid them across the roof to the other side of the roof. And by sliding them, they caused cracks in the roof. And that started the trouble. No, just kidding. That didn't start the trouble. The building process all at once started the trouble. But the roof, moving of the AC units across the roof, cracked the roof and the ceiling over the 4th floor. And then they had a building inspection. Lots of building inspections, actually. But because they're the Sampoong Group, they had everyone in their pockets and they passed every inspection. But the Sampoong Group knew that this building was going to collapse. They actually knew the day the building collapsed. They were having a meeting the day the building collapsed in the building, because the department store was one part of the building, this bright pink building, by the way, okay, that was finished in 1989, I believe, because it was right after the Summer Olympics in Seoul. The building is finished. They have their grand opening. The building lasts from 1989 to 1995, even though they knew it was eventually going to collapse. They just didn't know when. They didn't know how, but they knew it was going to collapse. But they knew their last day was coming on the day that it actually did collapse, June 29th of 1995, because all of the Sampoong Group have a meeting in the mall. So in the mall, there's the mall building, which is a bright pink building, and there's a causeway that kind of connects it to another building, which is offices, and the bottom floor is for basically your market for the normal, regular, everyday people to go to. And the Sampoong Group has a meeting in the offices that same day discussing what are they going to do about all these cracks, because they've already shut down some of the retail stores. They've already put buckets that are catching some leaks in the cracks. They're already having a discussion on what should we do? Should we do an evacuation? But no, they decided that they're not going to close the mall. My gosh, why would they do that? They would be losing money. They can't lose money. So, plus it's packed. There's thousands of people in this place. And they can't scare everyone and have an evacuation. They can't lose money. There's thousands and thousands of people entering these doors every day. So why in the world would they close it down? they'll deal with this stuff later. You know, we'll figure it out later. We know it's going to collapse, but we don't know when. It could be today. It could be tomorrow. It could be next year. I mean, heck, we've been open this many years. Who knows? It may not collapse at all. So we can't predict when this can happen. So we'll just keep it as is. So we're going to leave. We're going to go. We know the mall's going to collapse, but we're going to go. Leave it as is. We'll figure it out later. So they leave. They leave the building. And no sooner did they leave the building, did it all come tumbling down. Literally, like the Twin Towers came tumbling down on the day the planes flew into them. This building comes crashing down, and there are thousands of people left inside. There are people who give witness testimonies that they were on the 4th floor and they remember the shaking and the rumbling, and they remember that it didn't feel right. Something was wrong, very, very wrong. And they remember they had no time to get out. They were falling, the concrete, everything, the metal and the concrete just falling down, straight down, and they falling with it. People were trapped. They died. Over 500 lives were lost in this mall collapse, and over 1,500 others missing, wounded, tragically just gone. It was the worst non-wartime disaster and tragedy in all of South Korean history. All because this chaebol Sampoong family wanted to make money, and they wanted to build this mall and cut as many corners as possible to get it built as fast and quickly as possible. That they paid off the safety inspectors, they paid off the president at the time. The president of South Korea was even there for the ribbon cutting. He was there for it all. Why? Because he was paid off. Because the chaebols run Korea. They still run Korea to this day. So it's really sad that this many people lost their lives in this giant mall collapse. And people, the rescue teams came in, were searching for survivors. These people were crushed under this concrete, under the rebar, under everything. And what's nuts is that the original construction company had warned them. There were multiple warnings of this collapse, multiple warnings that they should not take out any columns, multiple warnings. But Sampoong brushed all those aside because they wanted to get this mall built, and they wanted to do it their way. So on June 29th of 1995, when this finally happens, after they saw the cracks start to appear in April of 1995, and they are having meeting after meeting about these cracks and just brushing it off, and they're just doing little things here and there. Well, we'll close this section of this store, or we'll put buckets under this store, or this crack, or that crack, or what have you. They already knew the cracks were coming, that they were there, but they did nothing about it. So by the time the mall collapsed, in just one big whoosh, the mall is gone. The whole mall. The only part that's left is the side with the offices and the market. But the entire big portion of the mall is just collapsed. And 2,000 people. So over 500 die. There are people searching for survivors for days, for weeks. People are trapped under this concrete mess, trapped so far deep down inside that no one can hear them. It's dark. Imagine just being in the dark and no one can hear you because you are piled under such thick concrete and electrical wires and water. You don't even know if it's water, but if you can get anything, like if you can even get a drop of something, People were trying to drink whatever they could if they could get it. People's portions of their bodies are trapped under something, and that maybe they can move a finger, maybe they can move a toe, maybe they can't move anything. Some people are compressed and can't even scream for help. No one can even hear them. But they are digging. The rescue teams are digging. They're trying, but possibly digging could move something that could crash or collapse something on someone that is under there. It's very, very dangerous. This rescue is dangerous, but it's also life-saving, but it's also, I mean, it's a crazy situation. They are saving people. They are getting people out. They get the last person out after 17 days. 17 days. And they couldn't believe it. 17 days someone was still in there. After that, there was no more searching. Families are begging them to keep looking, but they can't find anyone. No more survivors are found. The Sampoong family, of course, if you're not aware of how things work in South Korea or any Asian culture, you know, you bow, of course, and you apologize. And honestly, in most cultures, in most Asian cultures, that is what you do. You apologize. And pretty much that's what that's it. The Sampoong company obviously went out of business. They paid the families a minuscule amount of money. There were so many families that were impacted by this. They ended up getting a very minuscule amount of money. I think it was like 200,000, not even. A piece, maybe, if that. So when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, that is what bankrupted them. That is what got them. They no longer live in the country. They did get some jail time. I did see a documentary about this, and the grandson, I believe, or the son of the Sampoong family now lives in like Russia somewhere. He does not live in Korea anymore. They were given some prison time, but their time was brought down after appeal, because again, in South Korea, you can say you're sorry and you can go on about your business. It's kind of crazy. Their legal system there is not like ours here. You can appeal and get a lesser sentence. And as long as you compensate the families in some way, you can get a lesser sentence. So this is considered really like, I guess, a white collar crime is here. So the CEO was only given 7 years for accidental homicide and corruption. And he was fined, of course. And then the other parties were given like very low sentences. And then they had to compensate the families, but they said they couldn't afford to pay them any more than the 200,000. So after that, they all signed a memo offering their entire wealth to compensate the families, and now the Sampoong Group does not exist anymore. So they settled. The settlement involved 3,293 cases, people, families. And all the payouts were completed by 2003. So think about that. This happened in 1995, and all the payouts were completed by 2003. That's a really long time, you guys. So obviously the reaction by the country, by everyone, by the families was an outburst. There were many, many strikes. There were many protests. There were a lot of like things that went on. The families that have, there were people that were there that were just visiting South Korea. There are families that still return. There is no memorial on that site. They actually made a memorial and they put it in a park. The memorial is at Yongjae Citizens Forest. And it was designed by someone totally separate, by the Ewha Women's University. Sampoong didn't even want to do a memorial. Actually, the grounds that the mall was on is now condos. The Sampoong Group, the son, I believe, that is alive, that is living in Russia, he says there's no point in him making a public apology or going back to South Korea, or even if he did put a memorial there, what would be the point? It wouldn't bring any of the lives back. I think that's really sad. But I mean, on the other hand, he is right. A public apology wouldn't do any good. It's not going to do anything for the families. But I think in the culture, that is what they want. They want to hear that. I think they want to hear that they did cut corners. They did do this out of greed, out of selfishness, out of, and their family members died because they knew the mall was going to collapse. They saw the cracks months before. They were warned, and they were even there having a meeting that very day about the mall. Should we shut the mall down? Should we close and evacuate? But they chose money over lives. And that is horrific. And when you see the pictures of this, Pepto-Bismol pink mall, you'll be like, what? That was the greatest mall. But it was. In South Korea, that was huge because they had come out of wartime. My family immigrated here to the U.S. Right around this time, right before this mall was being a thought, like right around 1979, 1980, my family immigrated here to America, and my uncle, they lost everything after the war. So this being happening in South Korea was a huge deal. So having something like this, having goods and things brought to South Korea that people could, have all this luxury. That's why South Korea is the way they are right now, and so into luxury brands and these kind of things. And they have such a outlook and such a structured way and beauty standard, as they call it, because they came from nothing. So I guess we can judge it and call them greedy, call them selfish, call them whatever, but it is because they literally came from dirt and have had to redefine their culture, and get their culture back. And so, yes, there is a lot of greed and a lot of selfishness, and there is a lot of chaebols over there that run everything. And that is exactly what happened with the Sampoong Group. So like Daewoo is over, Sampoong is over. So now you have Samsung, you have LG, you have those groups that are running everything now in South Korea. So much like my other video, the Sewol ferry disaster that happened, that is a similar story where there is a big group organization that runs everything, that is a part of the chaebols, and they also had warnings of something was going to happen and bound to happen, and they didn't listen and heed to the warnings, and a lot of kids died. So this is another thing that happened in South Korea that is really sad. And these things happen here too, you guys. These things happen everywhere, where there are people that cut corners. Every time I pass, they're building townhouses right here behind me, and I'm looking at them and I'm like, that doesn't look straight. My boyfriend's like, what are you, a construction worker now? So, but I just look and I'm like, they're just popping these apartments up really fast. They're just popping that road up really fast. So, because, I'm watching these tragedy and disaster videos on YouTube, and I'm like, holy crap, that bridge just collapsed. And like, look, we're watching videos now of like a barge crashing into a bridge column and the whole bridge collapsed. How does that happen? So, these things happen, and it's because someone cut corners somewhere. So I just, over 500 people died just going to the mall. So I think it's really sad. And a company that could have been successful and was successful for quite some time, that could still be successful today if they hadn't cut corners, is donezo. So I hope that, for the families, I think of them. I think of how sad it is that, losing someone that way is awful. Losing someone at all is awful. But to, have someone who just went to the mall and then never came home, and to have a company be so negligent is even worse, because we see this a lot, especially with airplanes. Boeing is going through some stuff right now. So I think it's really sad. Definitely look it up if you want to see more about it. There's lots of documentaries about the Sampoong Mall disaster. It is really sad. There's lots of K-dramas about it, but it is something that really intrigues me. So I just wanted to share the story because it is huge, the amount of people and the amount of lives that were lost and the amount of people that it affected, and it still affects today, obviously. I mean, 1995 might seem far off to some people, but it's, this happened when I was still young. So I just wanted to share this tragedy. I'll have another terrible tragedy that happened in South Korea later, but this one is one that piques my curiosity, and maybe it will, pique yours. So I thank you all so much for watching, liking, and subscribing, sharing this channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you can know when another video has popped up. And I appreciate you all so much for watching. Please leave a comment. Thank you again. And I appreciate you all. And 감사합니다. Bye-bye.